Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, June 27th, 2024. Happy debate day. Before we talk about the debate today, we are going to be talking about a decision now coming from a major Republican super PAC in the 2024 Senate races to now invest $24 million in the Keystone State in the battleground state of Pennsylvania, backing the Republican nominee for Senate here, Dave McCormick. Now, this Republican, Dave McCormick, ran in 2022. If you remember, he ran against Dr. Oz and Kathy Barnett and ultimately came up as a very, very close runner-up. When you take a look at the 2022 Senate elections, in fact, you start to see exactly why Dave McCormick was the immediate favorite to run after Dr. Oz lost the general election after barely winning the nomination. When you look at the results of the Republican primary, Dave McCormick lost to Dr. Oz by a margin of just 1,000 votes, less than that, 900 votes, across 1.3 million cast. It was the closest Senate primary of the entire country, one of the closest we've seen this century, and it came at a time where this mattered so much. But the top two contenders here, Dr. Oz and Dave McCormick, had one thing in common. Neither of them was from the state of Pennsylvania, and that matters. The reason why you look at this, sorry, I'm trying to get my bearing here to show you, what we're talking about. Connecticut is where Dave McCormick is from. And this was one of the primary attacks we saw from John Fetterman's campaign on both Dr. Oz being from New Jersey and Dave McCormick being from the state of Connecticut. Now, this pivot here to Pennsylvania, we'll get to the Ohio and Montana point in just a moment, comes at a time where the Republican Party has been very adamant that they are focused on Montana and Ohio as their pathway to the Senate majority. A Senate majority that is currently 51-49, that at baseline will likely be 50-50 in the best case scenario for Democrats, with them winning the presidency this November. Best case, because West Virginia is a foregone conclusion. Republicans have been actually putting forth what arguably is one of the smarter methodologies around going towards an election like this one, focusing on just two states and pretty much abdicating responsibility from the remainder ones. And that made sense looking at our map here. The 2024 Senate elections are going to be primarily focused, still, regardless of this ad investment from Republicans in Pennsylvania, in Ohio and Montana. Why? Because Democrats currently hold both of these. Now, this is my most recent Senate map, one I published on May 24th and one that is certainly up for reconsideration, but definitely shows exactly why Republicans focusing on Montana, focusing on Ohio, made a lot of sense. Democrats, if they were to win Ohio, would have to be combating a Trump plus 8 or higher margin of victory. In Montana, based on where things stand right now, Republicans would have a victory in the presidential by anywhere from 15 to 20 points. Democrats would have an even bigger hurdle trying to overcome that as well. And so that's where you really see that people like Jon Tester from Montana and Sherrod Brown from Ohio are really in trouble. They're facing off against a presidential margin when the last time they did that was in 2012. And then in Montana, it was by the skin of his teeth for Jon Tester, and Sherrod Brown was in a much different position. And in 2012, Democrats won Ohio on the presidential level. So a very different national landscape here. And so we pretty much said this Republican strategy point to focus on Ohio, focus on Montana made a lot of sense. If they were just to shove all of their money and resources into these states, they arguably would be in a better position. A much better position than what they tried in 2022. A mistake where in 2022 they decided that in Pennsylvania they would be investing here, but equally be investing in Wisconsin and North Carolina and Georgia and Ohio and Arizona and Nevada, and in some instances, Washington State, New Hampshire, Colorado. Republicans were spread far too thin in terms of what national leadership wanted. We found here that Rick Scott, when he was running this entire thing, was running it into the ground. The candidates he refused to back, the unwillingness to intervene when Donald Trump was making a bad choice, and the unwillingness to recognize that some states were never going to go to the GOP no matter how hard they tried. States like Washington should have never been in consideration. States like Colorado and New Hampshire should have never been in consideration, and Democrats ran up those margins. 15 points in Colorado, 10 points in New Hampshire, 13, 14 points in the state of Washington. Those things matter. Because when Republicans are spending millions of dollars across these states, think about other states that were a bit closer. States like Georgia, where Raphael Warnock won by 2. States like Nevada, where Catherine Cortez Masto won by 0.8. The overestimation of Republican support here was ultimately to the downfall of the Republican Party in this state, in all of these states. They believed genuinely that this was going to be a red wave year and was unwilling to recognize that focusing their efforts on individual states, just less than 8 or 9 that you're actually targeting, more like 3 or 4, would have put them in a much better position to win Senate control in 2022. And so we thought they had learned in their decision-making to focus on Ohio and Montana. But now, Dave McCormick enters into the fray. Now, I've already told you he's from Connecticut, and that will certainly be a very big thing. There's interesting dynamics when it comes down to carpetbagging politics. In most cases, voters don't care. But where they care the most is actually Pennsylvania. It's one of the states in the country where roughly 80% of the population decides that, you know what, they're staying in this state. That the overwhelming majority of voters and people who live in Pennsylvania are very adamant about living here. And they reject politicians who decide to move themselves into it. That matters for people like Dave McCormick. But Republicans cleared the field for him when he wanted to run for the Republican nomination. They thought that because he was in direct contrast with Dr. Oz in 2022, that maybe he just was a better candidate. The Dave McCormick, who came into this race with practically no elected experience in politics, someone again who doesn't hail from the state of Pennsylvania, was propped up by the Pennsylvania GOP and the National Republican Party. But things didn't seem to be going too well. When you take a look at the head-to-head data between him and Bob Casey Jr., he's losing in every single recent poll. The closest race here has him losing by 2 points. Beyond that, he's down an average of 5 across the state. When you see Donald Trump and Joe Biden against each other in a head-to-head, Trump leads by 2.8 in Pennsylvania. That means there's roughly a 7 to 8 point swing from the presidential level to the Senate level. That's big for Bob Casey and really, really bad for Dave McCormick. And while I wouldn't be, saying that it is the best move to give up responsibility in a state like Pennsylvania, to say Republicans are on your own here, that national Republicans shouldn't be investing, but I think there's some merit in understanding that when you make a decision to enter into any race, Senate, House, presidential, you need to know that you can win. And while Dave McCormick in some extreme reality can win this Senate race, Bob Casey Jr. is an electoral juggernaut. Let's take a look at the history of this race briefly before we get into more about Dave McCormick. In 2012, Bob Casey Jr., who was the incumbent at the time, ran alongside the same ballot as President Obama and outperformed him quite tremendously, won by nearly 10 points across this battleground state. In 2018, he did even better, won by 13 points over that in this battleground state, a state that Donald Trump had won just 2 years prior. Pennsylvania, with Bob Casey, he's strong, he's liked, and he's someone who can easily win this 2024 Senate race. Should Joe Biden win the state of Pennsylvania, and I say this because I believe that it is something that is well within the realm of possibility. Let's get to this forecast here. Should Joe Biden win the state of Pennsylvania, as of right now, he is predicted to do so. There is no chance that Bob Casey loses. I understand the wanting to invest in a race, but sometimes when you're up against electoral incumbents like this one, you don't spend that much money trying to make them win. Remember 2018? I brought it up just for a second. Lou Barletta was largely abandoned by national Republicans. Why? Because they knew Bob Casey was going to win. Well, where else did this happen? In Wisconsin, Leah Vukmir, who ran against Tammy Baldwin, here's the thing. Tammy Baldwin ended up winning by 11 points, and we knew she would win by 11 points. That's why Republicans didn't invest in this race. In Minnesota, Amy Klobuchar easily expected to win. Republicans didn't invest there. And this time around, Republicans are not investing in Minnesota. They're not investing in Virginia. They're not investing in New Mexico. They're not investing in Maine. States that in some other circumstances might be more competitive, but Republicans know. I fear they may not know well enough. Because while Pennsylvania, sure, is going to be competitive on the presidential level, it might be narrower, will be for sure, and I want to say this, for sure narrower than it was in 2018 and 2012. It doesn't change the end result if Bob Casey Jr. ends up winning anyways. And if Republicans are to recognize that this early on, which I think it would make sense for them to do so, that no matter how much money you throw into that race, Bob Casey Jr. will defeat Dave McCormick, even if Joe Biden loses to Donald Trump in the state. Pennsylvania will still be blue on some level. And I think that is the big problem here for national Republicans, is that when they look at states to target and focus on, they often are blinded by what should be happening versus what is actually happening. Here's the thing. Looking at the 2024 Senate races, there are so many ways Republicans do have a pathway to the Senate majority if you were to look at it from the lens of a presidential level. Ohio and Montana are easy guesses, but so would be Arizona and Nevada and Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And in some circumstances, Minnesota, Virginia, New Mexico, Maine. These are areas of the country where Republicans, in theory, could do quite well, but in reality, are not. This is why we need to sort of look at this from a more analytical perspective. Republicans are so focused on trying to run up the margin, so it seems. This entire Donald Trump campaign has been working under the assumption that they are solidified in an electoral victory. Think about it from this way. Why else would Trump be opening up 19 field offices in Virginia and Minnesota unless they thought they were going to win Virginia and Minnesota? Why in the world does Donald Trump spend time campaigning in New Jersey instead of Pennsylvania unless he already thought he was going to win Pennsylvania? I think there may be a problem at the highest of levels of overconfidence when it comes down to the presidential level. And I've been saying that for months, that people like Chris LaSavita, Donald Trump's senior campaign manager who spends all of his time around the former president, he is under this assumption that this election is a shoo-in for Trump. And it's all about running up the margin. You can see it in the way he talks about the race. You can see it in the way Trump talks about the race. His closest advisors are giving him this idea and assumption that there's no reality in which he loses. Same thing with that Fox News poll. What did it say? Biden was up for the first time since October of 2023. And he calls it fake news. Why? Because everyone around him is telling him he's winning all of these states. So what does this mean for the Senate elections? I think something similar could be happening with some of these national Republicans. That, okay, we already have Montana and Ohio, 60 million ad reserved here. We don't need anything more. We're going to win it. Now let's expand. But here's the problem. What happens if you spend $100 million combined across other states and Democrats win all of them and Democrats narrowly win a state like Ohio and Montana and bring them to 50? What happens in a circumstance like that one? That's what I think I would be most concerned about if I was a Republican looking at it from this perspective. Because while they do focus on Montana, they focus on Ohio, why are all of a sudden we throwing in Pennsylvania? Because when Mitch McConnell talked about the states that he was focusing on, it was Pennsylvania, Montana, Ohio, and Maryland. Well, two are not like the other two. Two are states that Biden won in 2020 in Maryland. I don't know where in the world they would be investing money here, but I guarantee you if they do, that will be one of the most poor political decisions we have seen of this election cycle, but I wouldn't put it past them. Because Pennsylvania is the first step. It says this investment here is a sign of confidence in Pennsylvania, but really isn't. The problem I have with focusing your energy and resources on this is that there are so many other states that are arguably more winnable or on par here. I already have estimations here that Nevada and Arizona are going to be smaller margins than Pennsylvania. That Michigan will be a smaller margin than Pennsylvania. I think most people, most political pundits, most people on Democratic side, Republican side would agree with me. So why are you not focusing there? Why is it that Pennsylvania and Maryland, who share a likely and safe Democratic characterization respectively, are being valued more than Michigan, than Arizona, than Nevada, and on par with, potentially, states like Wisconsin and Minnesota and California? I mean, it is insanity that this is the way that money is going, but that's what you expect. When you have too many Washington, D.C. think tank heads who are looking at this again from the perspective of, understanding it, not from where it is, but just where they think it should be, what the vibes are saying, what the presidential election results might reveal, because that isn't everything in Senate elections, and we know that so deeply. We know that so deeply. And 2022, quite frankly, was not a good showing for Republicans in Pennsylvania or Republicans nationwide. The polls said that, hey, Dr. Oz was going to beat John Fetterman, who was then the lieutenant governor and now the sitting U.S. senator. They said he would win by 0.5. He lost by 0.5 times 10. John Fetterman trounced Dr. Oz in the Senate race in Pennsylvania. Completely unexpected. Something similar could happen this time around, except Democrats do far better than expected in Pennsylvania and in some of these other races here. Dave McCormick is Dr. Oz light, and the idea that he's going to be the one who makes Pennsylvania a red state on the Senate level is just simply false. He is no Pat Toomey. He's no Arlen Specter. He's not the type of Republican who can win in this state because he's not even a Republican from the state. His filing address came from a P.O. box. His only intrusion into the race has started as recently as 2022. Dave McCormick is not from Pennsylvania. And again, look into this, talking about which states care the most about carpetbaggers. Pennsylvania is up there, and it mattered so much in 2022, and it will matter again in 2024. Bob Casey will win the Senate race this November, no matter how much money the Republicans try to throw at it. And throwing $24, $30 million, nearly $100 million we expect to be thrown at this race by the end of November, all for it to amount to absolutely nothing. Feels very reminiscent of what we saw back in 2020 when Democrats maybe missed the mark in the way they spent some of their money. Focusing 100 mil in South Carolina to lose by 10. Focusing 100 mil in Kansas to lose by 11. Focusing 100 mil in Montana to lose by 10. When in reality, maybe, more money needs to go to states like Iowa, where Joni Ernst underperformed Donald Trump by 3 points. States like Texas, where it could have been narrower and built up the infrastructure for future years. There are reasons to believe that maybe there were more reasons to focus in other states. That races that were more competitive, could have been more likely to go blue, or at least keep Republicans at bay in some down ballot House races where Democrats lost. Keep Democrats, up in the state legislative races. There are a bunch of different reasons to think about why investments there would have made more sense. And so I think looking at Pennsylvania at the highest degree, maybe in some reality, Bob Casey loses to Dave McCormick. But it's not this one. And the heavy investments into the race, again, feel very wrong, very, out of place, and arguably not the right move for the moment that it means for the Republican Party nationwide. But of course, again, they're free to do whatever decisions they want. But when we do analysis on this, we see exactly why this is a bad choice, and while it may be shifting away from their otherwise Ohio and Montana strategy that at one point was probably their strongest way of thinking, that they have now deviated from and could actually hinder them very heavily in these November Senate elections. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for 2024 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.